Another important aspect in clustering Liferay is the document and media library. Because once you fire up one Liferay instance, it will look at its own file system in Liferay home data for the default location of the document library store. In an earlier chapter we have mentioned, or I have mentioned, the simple file system store, the advanced file system store, the database store, and so on. Now, an important aspect of clustering Liferay is that all of the nodes that you configure must access the same database. Because, well, you'll update some data on one of the nodes, it gets persisted to the database, you request it from the other node, tell you something, it better requests the data from the same database and not from a different one. The same is true for the document storage. But document storage by default is on the file system. So you'll have to tell both Liferay instances to please use the same file system, to please use the same storage for the documents, for the binary documents. Now, an easy way to make sure that this happens is you'll just configure the database store. But we've covered that during that old chapter. Some of the database administrators don't mind if you store some binary data in their precious relational database. Others will show you the door if this is an option for you. So you can use the database storage or you'll use one of the file storages. But now that we're operating on two different nodes, on two different machines, we'll actually have something to do to make a same storage available for both. Well, in our test setup, in our training setup, we've got a very easy situation because we're running on the same machine anyways, and deep down they all share the same file system. We can just introduce a volume to both of the Docker images or containers, and they will share this implementation. That's easy. This is what we do. However, we'll also configure something else. We have a couple of options to configure these settings, and one of the settings is, I'll start at the bottom, Portal X properties. This is where we actually tell Liferay which store to use. So we can tell the advanced file system store is the store to use, or the simple file system store is the one to use, or the database store is the one to use. However, the configuration of the advanced file system store happens through the system settings. You have already seen them, control panel, configuration, and the system settings. There you'll find the document library storage, the advanced file system storage, and you can configure the location, the network path, basically the mount path, where every single node should store its its documents. That's easy, but in order to actually use this directory, you'll have to switch it on in Portal X properties. You'll have to enable the store in Portal X properties. Default is the simple file system store. I've covered that earlier. Simple file system store will store all of the documents in one directory. I think physically it's all of the documents of one site in one directory, and there are only two file systems these days that I trust that they can handle all kinds of load with a bunch of files in a single directory, and most of them I never see in production. So most likely you don't have that kind of file system. My recommendation is, whatever you do, change the default from simple file system store to the advanced file system store, because that can handle all kinds of loads, any number of documents in there. I would say, if you want to avoid any problems, do that early. We have started with a simple file system store because we didn't configure it yet, which means if you have uploaded some documents already, they will be stored in the simple file system format, which means before we'll switch to the advanced file system store, we'll have to migrate them from one to the other. Lucky enough, there is a tool in the control panel under system administration where you can use just a simple command or a simple mouse click to move from one storage to the other. And that's under system configuration system administration data migration. And here's also the configuration that you should have to enable the advanced file system store in Portal ext properties. Set the property DL for document library .store.impl, and then it's a class name, it's the advanced file system store. And as always with Portal ext properties, you will have to restart. In our case, with the Docker images, you'll have to change the file, you'll have to rebuild the image, and then you'll have to restart the container from the new image, of course. Mentioned in an earlier chapter, we have the Cmis configuration as well. We'll have the S3 store as well. So no matter where you want to store, you'll have to first of all configure the store. For S3 you'll have to say which bucket it is, like all of the data that you need for an S3 store. For CMIS you'll have to configure which CMIS system do you have, where's the URL. I'm not sure if there's username, password or something like that. Some credentials should probably be there. And then you'll have to enable it with, again, same configuration value here, dl.store.impl. And restart, and Liferay DXP will happily store all of the binary data in the store that you have configured. Now one more, I've said all of the nodes must share the same database, and we've just covered all of the nodes must share the same document storage, be it a directory, be it an S3 bucket, be it a CMIS system. And we'll also have a full text search index, and by default that's Elasticsearch. And you can easily imagine if you upload one document to one server and you'll search for it on the second server, you may have an argument that you expect to find the document that has been indexed on server number 1, which means they also got to share the search index. And it so happens that the only supported configuration of any Liferay installation is one with an external Elasticsearch server. Now what we've covered so far is we have just fired up a Liferay bundle out of the box, and that embeds its own Elasticsearch server within the same virtual machine. That works, that's a great demo and test system because it just fires up one machine. But if you ever run into problems with that and you ask support to please fix those problems, they will tell you the only supported way to operate this search server is if Elasticsearch is started as a separate process. Which neatly solves our problem, because now when we fire up two machines in the cluster, we just connect them to the same Elasticsearch instance and we're done. So win-win as far as I would say, but that's a configuration that we simplified from when we set up our very first Docker image which uses Elasticsearch embedded. If you wonder why this happens, optimization or memory configuration for Elasticsearch and for Liferay varies or differs dramatically. When you optimize for one, you de-optimize for the other, and vice versa. And especially when both fight for resources for the main memory to use, you want them to be not to interact with each other, and you want to scale them independently. Plus, most likely you want to run an Elasticsearch cluster as well, and Elasticsearch is easy to cluster, but as always, this is Liferay DevOps training and not Elasticsearch DevOps training. So you can refer to the Elasticsearch documentation, how to cluster Elasticsearch. We'll just set up a separate server. This will be an extra Docker image that we then fire up as the Elasticsearch container and configure both of the nodes that we set up to connect to the same Elasticsearch server. Now, configure the portal for clustering. This is your exercise. This is where you get to be active. Finally, you don't have to listen to me anymore, but now you'll get your hands dirty. Cluster your portal means you'll have to change Portal ext properties, enable cluster link. We've seen that single line. That's actually trivial, but it's in Portal X properties. This requires you to build a new image. This requires you to restart your container from the new image. And while you're at it, you might as well just configure the advanced file system store. With this, remember, if you have uploaded some documents already, then you'll have to migrate them from one to the other. and we'll update the Docker files for Elasticsearch. We'll actually create them. No, actually, it's there. We have prepared it for you, but this is the first time you'll make use of it. And then we'll actually make use of advanced file system store and then restart everything. My recommendation is to start the nodes when you start them after each other and not in daemon mode or attached to the machine and look at the log files so that you can see one node is done starting, and then you'll fire up the other node and you'll see the communication that goes on between the two nodes. That will be trivial. Oh, and by the way, I think the current material is not yet really reflecting one of the facts I told you. When you have started with simple file system store and you have uploaded some data, then you'll need to migrate them to advanced file system store. Now, there's a trick in there. When you have started on simple file system store, you have uploaded data, because the default image, the default logo for your default site, which is the DXP rings, this logo, is uploaded at startup, at very first startup, to the document library. Which means if you don't migrate from simple file system store to advanced file system store, you will see an error message and you will be missing that one image in the top left corner of your browser. It's a nice way to just demonstrate in simple terms you'll need to migrate from one store to the other before you actually activate it, or you'll just lose an image. Nothing bad happens, but it will be immediately visible that yes, you've missed something. Okay. Ready, set, go.